Adhyatma Padavali in our previous sessions. And in the previous sessions, does anyone remember anything we discussed? Key topics? It's not like a test, so don't worry about your memory. We did discuss a little bit about karma, I think, if you remember that. And we also talked about phi sum y, the 5 important causal factors which lead to the situations in which we are. Kal, Swabhav, Karma, Purushartha, and Niyati. Now, as Acharya Tulsi has composed his Adhyatma Padavali, Adhyatma means spirituality, Pad means the verses, and Adi means line. So there are a sequence of verses, around 100 of them, bringing up different spirituality in different contexts. I mean, presenting spirituality in different ways. So now the next verse which we are discussing is about Chaitanya. So it's the 28th verse of Adhyatma Padavali, and it says, Chaitanya Chaitanyamay hai Chaitanya Triroop Sthul Sukshma Ati Sukshma Jyam Urja Ushma Dhoop. So he says that Chaitanya has 3 roop. It has 3 forms: Sthul, Sukshma, and Ati Sukshma. And the analogy he gives is Urja, Ushma, and Dhoop. So when we look into Urja means, like for example, there is fire. For example, sun, it has light in it, it has heat energy in it, and it also gives us, we say Dhoop, Dhoop means the sunlight. So it has sunlight in it, and it is there, right? Where it is, but we are getting sunlight here, and it has energy. Solar energy is a big source of energy. So here there are 3 forms which the Chaitanya has: Sthul, Sukshma, and Ati Sukshma. Gross, subtle, and the subtlest form. I had a question when we came in, which is the biggest gift of life? And we'll try to answer that, and from there we will see what Acharya Tulsi has to say. So what do you think is the biggest gift of your life?
Awareness.
Awareness, okay, good.
Human form. Human form.
Human birth. Huh?
Ability to think.
Ability to think and listen. Yes. The life of a human being is the biggest gift of life. And the body which we have is called Audarik Sharir. The word Audarik, it has the word Udar. Udar means, like for example, is very generous. And this is the only body which is the most generous of all the bodies. Why? Because this is the only body which helps us liberate. There are other bodies which can help you enjoy. Like for example, a heavenly body, a Vaikriya body. There's a lot one can enjoy in the heaven. And enjoying the heavenly pleasures, it is, people actually say, kahan jana hai? Swarg jana hai, right? Do we really want to go to heaven? Swarg jana hai kya? Acharya Bhikshu, when he was almost about to pass off, he had taken Santhara as well. And then it was his last few moments, and one of his disciples beside him said, "You're almost ready to go to heaven. I mean, you're almost going to Swarg now. I mean, time is up and you're going to Swarg." Though it was a general statement, because that's a natural thing, right? After death, if a person has lived a good life, they end up into Swarg. He said, we have consumed and we have enjoyed so many pleasures in so many lives, so never think of heaven. So here there was an awareness in him, even in his last breath, that his goal is not just his next life, but the last destination. So here the Udar body, the Audarik body, is the greatest gift of life, and which is Thul, which means it is very gross, it's tangible. And what is the one which, like, who gives us this gift basically?
So karmas.
Hmm?
One karma.
Right. So there is another body, which is Karman body. And that, because of that Karman body, we get the gift of Audaric body. Now what is in between this Karman and the Audaric body is the Tejas body. Tejas body is the power source, vital body, bioelectric body. So literally we have three different bodies which we are carrying currently. The physical body which is visible to us, but the two other subtle bodies are not visible. The two subtle bodies have been with us since infinite time. So who is your actual companion in your journey? Not your spouse. These two bodies. Because if even for a second they leave you, you're liberated. But they have never left you even for a second in your infinite journey of past.
There must be a start somewhere. I still do not understand this, because how can you have three bodies and if they are saying there's no start, there's no end, the end is your goal. Where is the start in this?
The problem in starting is there will be a starting point if someone has done something. Like for example, if the pen was produced, it will have the year of production, right? But for Jains, the soul is not produced, it was just there in its own state. So for example, when we talk about people go for mining and they get the diamonds or gold from the mines. When and who did keep these gold and diamonds in the mines? When was it there? It was just there. It's just a cycle which is going on, and because of that cyclical process, carbon becomes to diamond or coal or whatever, right? So there is a cycle where the soul is going through on and on and on, and if we have to point out where did it start, it is always there. So if you don't if we go by the theory that we were always there, then the question of where did I start doesn't have space. The moment you say the world was produced by God, then the question of start comes, and then the question of where did the first karma come to me comes up. In Hinduism, Brahminical tradition believes God created the world, right? If you ask them, if God created the world, why did I get this karma? Right? What would they say? When the God created the world, why did they create me, an Indian, and someone else, an American? Why did they create someone healthy and someone unhealthy? What is the answer to that? They would say he created according to your own past prarabdha, which means your past karma, which means you didn't start somewhere, we are always there. Even if we go by the theory of whether God created the world or not, if this is the truth, then in reality there is no starting point.
Practically.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean that would suggest that the souls are, the other thing we say is the souls are infinite, and therefore if some of them essentially achieving liberation, then are the numbers which are not achieving liberation reducing them?
Yeah, do we have a board somewhere, like we can write something? Good way of like looking into this. So suppose I draw a set here and I start from the 0, -1, and this goes infinity here. So how many numbers in this? Infinite? Right? Suppose I draw another set here and I just put in the even numbers in it. and this is again infinite here. It's not going to help me long, but it's fine. We'll work it out. So this is again infinite numbers. I'll draw another one. Let's just put the odd numbers here. All three are infinites. Suppose I take this and I say, okay, all the even numbers have been removed from this, which means have liberated from this. What remains? Odd numbers remain. What is this? Infinite. So if you add anything to infinity, it remains infinity. If you minus anything from infinity, it remains infinity. So again, this might have issues, right? Because naturally, if we go by our logical theory, this infinite should be less than this infinite. But the moment you say one infinite is less than the other infinite, is it infinite? Okay, now there are problems. The truth is, in Jainism, we have 8 different kinds of infinity. Minimum infinite, moderate infinite, maximum infinite. It's a huge theory there. But there is one, the most biggest is infinite infinite. Infinite, the power of infinite. Right? And if I'm right, there is nothing like infinite to the power. Everything which is existing, for example, we talk about everything is mathematical in Jainism in a way. The number of souls, the number of karma, the number of lives you have lived. Everything is spoken in the language of infinite, or in the language of numbers, if you put it that way. So when we try to present different things in the language of numbers, we say, okay, for example, a person has reached the 13th Gunasthan, and it's going to end into the 14th Gunasthan, the last part of his life. How many karmas does it shed? Infinite. So I'm trying to give you like how the theories are there, and which infinite is that, or what kind of infinite is that, or what kind of asankhya is that, or what kind of number is that? Because again, there are many kinds of infinites, many kinds of asankhya, many degrees of it basically. So this analogy, I think, helps us to understand that infinite is too huge to ever exhaust basically. And the good part of the Jain theorist is that it says it's not just, there are two types of souls, right? Bhavya and Abhavya. You know what it is? Yeah?
No.
What is Bhavya means?
I don't understand.
Anyone who knows Bhavya and Abhavya?
Those
Bhavya
Yeah. So Bhavya are those souls which have the capacity to liberate. Abhavya doesn't have the potency to liberate itself. Like for example, if there is a stone which we've got from the mines, this stone might have the potency to become an idol. There are certain stones which might not have the potency to become an idol. So similarly, literally there are two categories of souls. Some who has the potency, some who doesn't have the potency. And above that, even those who have the potency, not all liberate. There are many bhavyas who have the potency, many stones, many rocks who have the potency to be the idol, is never shaped into an idol.
So isn't that a scary thought? कि हम जितना पर पुरुषार्थ कर सकते हैं, but if I'm abhavya, then I've got no hope.
Okay, the thing is, if you're doing purusharth, there was a person who asked this question, whether I'm bhavya or abhavya, how do I know? If you're raising that question, you're literally bhavya. Because abhavya will never have a thought of liberation. So if you're doing purusharth for liberation, it literally means you're bhavya. You don't have to worry about it. Your investment would go right, basically. On it. It is, but if you go by this theory of bhavya and abhavya as well. To say that some souls are naturally abhavya is surely it ends into when we talk about niyativad, right? That is the destiny of that soul. That they are, like for example, if a stone, the problem here is when we say that there is these two categories of soul, I'm not giving you the, there are two aspects of everyone, right? One is very enjoyable, pleasant, and sweet, but there is something which might be a little bit of tough to take. So even in Jainism, there is this concept of niyati, where there are certain souls, they are not abhavya because of their karma. They're not abhavya because they did something good or bad. They are abhavya because just they are that way. A stone, when it comes from the mind, it is the way it is. It is not that someone made it or someone didn't make it or the stone made an effort towards it. It naturally is like that. Am I making sense? Yes.
Does that mean that an abhavya soul, when they move from one life to another, will they always remain abhavya in the next life?
Yes. Which means these are souls which don't have the potency to liberate, which means they will always be in the cycle of birth and death without thinking that there is something called liberation and I can get out of it.
There's a potential for bloody souls too.
Yes.
Yes.
Now again the potency is the audaric body is called udar, right? Udar means which is more generous. So in Acharan it says the cause of bondage is the cause of liberation. Which means the audaric body which we have can be a cause of liberation. A bhavya can be a human being and do a lot of stuff, spiritual stuff, to liberate oneself. The same soul can end up into heaven or hell. A person who goes into heaven or hell will have audaric body always. Which means a person from a being from heaven never goes to hell. A being from hell never goes to heaven. It's only animal and human life form. Animal means Tiryansh, overall Tiryansh. It's Tiryansh and humans who can end up into heaven and hell, which means audaric body. So audaric body has the potency for liberation, has the potency of the last heaven as well. It has the potency of last hell as well.
So does it mean abhavya souls will not do any good karma, any good deeds? Because
they might do it. It's not like they don't do it at all, but their purpose will not be liberation. I'll give you another example. There is a concept, another, which says that a soul who is abhavya can also be the acharya of the congregation, which means head of the congregation. That soul who is the head of the congregation maintains the congregation, does all the administrative work, and guides, manages everyone's spiritual journey. But at the end, at the back of the mind, the purpose is,
administration.
it's not liberation. Like some people do tapasya. Why? Because of tapasya, people get recognition. Because of tapasya, people think good about you. What is the motive there? Appreciation from the world. So the intention behind the act would be very different. A person goes to temple so that he gets his job done, receives the gift of whatever, all material comfort and pleasure. The other person goes to the temple to heal his soul, not the world. So though the world outside and inside is very different. A person might never go to a temple, but inside his heart is pure, detached. A person might go to temple every day, and if there is one small step error in the puja, he would blast out. Why? So obsessed, it should be this way. What is this? So there could be obsession of one's own ritual. It could be obsession of one's own body, it could be obsession of anything for that matter. So even a Jain, as Bhagavan Mahavir clearly says, just because you're born Jain, it doesn't mean liberation is guaranteed to you, right? You have to walk the path of non-violence. So the Audaric body has the capacity to get the most self-control. The self-restraint which we can bring about to this body is the maximum. Even as animals, they might have some self-discipline. There might be animals who go into meditation mode. There might be animals who do tapasya. There might be animals who do samayik. But animal as practicing sadhu life, ascetic life, complete detachment, complete denial of the worldly pleasure is not possible. And that is the reason why we say that practicing asceticism is the most important step in the journey of liberation. Whether you do it externally or not, internally that ascetic life should come within you, that detachment should come within you, like in the case of Bharat. He was in the world, but he was still detached from the world. And that makes a big difference. So here, the Audaric body, there is one of the concepts where a heavenly being is in the Devlok, right? But that soul can die and be born in Prithvikai. You know, Prithvikai means earth. So literally, they can be born, they can die and be born in their own jewelry. So they wear beautiful garlands and beautiful earrings, which is made up of different kinds of earth material. And they're so obsessed about it that one dies and is born in his own earring. Imagine, on the one end it is Devta, it is heavenly being. Where does it end up into? One's own earring. Why? They're so obsessed about their own jewelry. So that cycle of obsession carries on and could end up into, that we were discussing earlier about Punyanubandhi Punya and Papanubandhi Punya. So there is this Punya which they have, the reward which from their life, past life, they end up into getting a lot of pleasure, comfort, everything. But how do you enjoy that? With attachment, with detachment, with obsession, or with the reality that it can end up anytime. Like for example, a 500 and 1,000 note, right? One day it had a great value, but now zero value. The moment it has zero value, is it the same for you?
No, it is still 500,000. In your mind, still was the attachment.
So the people who were too attached, they had to go through it in a difficult way. People who knew that this is life said, well, it has come, we'll deal with it. And they tried to resolve it to the best they could do it. Similarly, when we talk about Audaric Sharir, the Audaric Sharir is made up of material energy, right? Today, now, I see myself as this is me. But constantly, I'm changing. Constantly, I'm taking particles and I'm discarding particles. When I was young, I was different. Now, I'm different. And as I age, the body would be different. The material energy which I receive, and it's a part of me, it's me. But there is some matter which I used and I discarded. For example, there is something which has gone into this piece of cloth here. This piece of cloth has some particles which are my own discarded particles. Is it me? No. There are some particles in this which I will grab and make it as a part of my body. Is that me? My past discarded particles, nor the ones which I will take future, are a part of me. Which I have it now is me. But is it really me? It's just going through a change. So the problem with us is that we identify ourselves with the matter which we own as a body, but literally it is a temporary time. how long is this body part of me? Literally, according to even science, the body completely changes in certain number of years. It's every part of it, every atom of it would be different. But still, I call it me. Yes. There's actually a science project where the doctor, this is kind of just imagination, and the technology says that we would advance to that extent. Suppose a person is sick, and the doctors say there are two options for you. One, every part of your body would be transplanted, even the skin, every cell of it, and you will be healthy and fit as a young youth again. The other option is we'll keep your body, freeze it off, and when the technology advances to the degree where your body could be healed, we will treat you and you'll be alive again. Which option would you choose? In the first case, every piece of the body is replaced. Would you go for that, or you would wait for another era, the technology to develop and heal your body? Which one would you choose?
You go for a
First
new
one.
body.
First one.
First one.
Totally new body.
Are you sure?
No, not new body. I mean, what he says, I really would accept the new one, new body. Everything is new, everything is replaced, the atoms and everything else.
You don't want to wait for technology to grow. But then it's not you then, right?
No, it's still same, because I think what you're saying is we are in constant flux, aren't we, all the time, exchanging, giving, taking.
Right. If you go by that, it is fine. But otherwise, the general theory is that how can I be a different person, right? I mean, if this is me, how can every piece of me be replaced by something else and it is still me? People go for heart transplant or liver. There are different organs which is being transplanted, and yet the person says it is me. So when we look in the mirror, we have the problem that we cannot deny that it is me. But if you go to the doctor, you are ready for that change, right? So when we go to a doctor, we have the fear of death. And that makes us ready for everything in life. Why not in your own house? The truth that this body is a tool, and as Uttarakhand says, Sharir Mahu Navati Jivo Uche Navyo. It's like a boat. You can use this boat to travel. But what the travel itself means is detachment. You're traveling ahead. How do you recognize that, yes, my journey is moving ahead? What are the parameters which says that, yes, I am progressing in spirituality? Is there any parameter which can, when you go to a university, there is a degree, and the university makes a claim that, yes, this person is a doctor. And then you start your own therapy. What is that which helps us analyze that, yes, you've graduated in your spirituality? You've been listening to lectures, right? Some from 4 years, some from 10 years, some from 1 year. But we are sitting in the same room. The person who is listening from 10 years and 1 year is in the same classroom. Is it possible? Should it be this way? The truth is, externally we might be sitting in the same room, but internally we might be receiving the same message in a very different level. The same story, when you listen as a child, it was different for you. When you listen now, it is very different for you. So the beauty of spirituality is the same lesson can give you a very different depth of understanding when you have graduated to a different class. The external graduation is not needed. The internal thinking would be at a very different level. So here this Audaric body helps us grow that spiritual thinking to the highest extreme. And the 14th Gunasthan is a state where there is complete stillness, which means the physical body movement. Of course, when you sit in meditation, you're still, right? But are you completely still? Your breath is running, your blood is circulating, your heart is beating, everything inside the body is functional. 14th Gunasthan is that state where the heart is not beating, the blood is not circulating, the breath is not running. It is complete stillness of every particle of the body. That stillness is for how long? It says if you pronounce A-E-I-O-U, how long did it take?
Second, less than a second.
It's just that long. If we have the stillness of the whole system, liberation is just there. Because after that, the 14th Gunasthan is just that short span of time and everything is cleared out. There is liberation. So it is only through this Audaric body that complete stillness, that intense meditation, the highest state of Shukla Dhyan can be accomplished. And we gradually grow, small steps, baby steps we take. We try to meditate, we use mantras. Mantras is motion actually, right? Breath, we say we concentrate on your breath. It is again movement. So everything we are trying to do meditation now is with movement. It's some action. It's not non-action completely. At the end, what do we try to do? Drop everything and just be in the now. So those few seconds we try to go for little bit of non-action, and then eventually the more we grow into it, we are going higher and higher. Though the initial stages are not, it is valuable. It's not like not valuable, because these, कहते हैं कि there are अशुभ योग, शुभ योग, शुद्धोपयोग. Ashubh योग means negative action. Like for example, a person is thinking, but is thinking negative. But then the person says, I shouldn't be thinking negative. How do I stop myself? Use a mantra. You say, okay, I'm constantly going to repeat this mantra, whether I'm walking in, out, wherever, so that I have my mind hooked up to something. So the moment you choose your mind to hook up to something, you're choosing from negative to positive, the Shubh Yoga. Then comes a stage where there is Shuddhopayog, which means even the Shubh Yoga has been dropped. The effortful action of being positive is dropped. You're in the pure state of being. So that journey of growing into spirituality is by this Sthula body. The other bodies which exist is Sukshma and Ati Sukshma. So Sukshma is the bioelectric body. We see some people are very vibrant, very vital, they're always energetic. Why? It is this Tejas body. This bioelectric body is a power body, it's a fuel body, it's energy body. And that keeps the person very vibrant. Some people have constipation problems, some people have intense, healthy digestive system. So the digestive system, the energy which works in the digestive system is this Tejas body. Tejas body is a companion body of the karmic body. And it always accompanies karmic body. And the most problematic body is karmic body actually.
What's the difference between Tejas body and Leshya?
Okay, so the next verses which is going to come up is when we talk about these three bodies. What is the interaction of the soul with this gross body, the Tejas body and the karmic body is what we're going to discuss. So in the further verses, Achashi talks about Adhyavasai, Leshya and Udayakshopsham and all that stuff. So we're going to go into, basically it is to answer how they correlate with each other, how they work with each other. If we have three pieces, how they interact with each other. For example, if this is a watch, right, and it is running, there is a whole system which is moving inside. There is a whole step-by-step process which gives the conclusion that the needles would run. So there is 1, 2, 3, there are different stages of it, different pieces of it, each interact and then produces the result. So here, when we are sitting here and talking, there is a lot of different layers within us. In simple language, we said 3 bodies: Audaric, Tejas and Karmic. But how these 3 interact for me to sit here and talk? For how these 3 interact to form the Lesha, the Shubha. We have sometimes positive bhav, sometimes negative bhav. If there are 3 glasses, one glass has water, the other glass has lemon in it, lemon juice, the third has sugar. All 3 are lying different, right? When you mix it, it becomes lemonade. What is the taste of the lemonade? It's different. You enjoy it. And if you change the sugar to salt, it will have a different taste. So the taste which is produced there and the way that the dish, the juice becomes is based on the interaction of different ingredients. You add some color to it, it looks different. So depending on what kind of color you add, you would have another touch to it. So here all these different components, the way they interact and they produce, the result is actually the different states of being which we go through. When we say we had a happy mood in the day, morning, and now I'm kind of dull, where is the dullness coming from? It's because of their interaction. And what kind of interaction results to this is what we're going to discuss in our next session. So here we just went into these 3 bodies. The most important thing which we have to understand here is we have 8 kinds of karma, right? So of those 8 kinds of karma, one of the karma is Nam karma, right? Because of Nam karma we have the body. This is also clear, right? Because the kind of Nam karma we have, accordingly we have the body. Now suppose I say I have this Audaric body because of Audaric Nam karma. So this is Audaric Nam karma. One of the body is karmic body. Because of one of the kinds of Nam karma, this is karmic body. On the other hand, we say, what is karmic body? All the karmas is karmic body. Are you getting the problem? One type of karma is, so basically, if there is like umbrella karma, right? Of this umbrella karma, there is one piece. It's just one is this. Because of this one, there are 5 bodies. Actually, there are 5 kinds of bodies, which we have 3 of them. This is one. This is second, for example, and the third one is Tejas. What is the difference between this body, this, and this? What is the relationship between these 3? The karma is a whole set of karmas which includes Jnanavarniya, Darshanavarniya, Mohaniya, Antaraya, everything. Of those karma, Nam karma is only one type of it. And because of Nam karma, there is bodies. Which means the karmic body is because of Nam karma, right? This is clear? What is the relationship of karmic body and karmas then? Are you finding the problem?
Why does the karmic body have to be because of Nam karma? Karmic body is, as you say, is an overall body.
That's a good question. So it is body, right?
Yeah.
The moment you use the word body, body should be related to Nam karma.
I see.
Okay, so basically, it is a huge, big problem which I really don't have myself a great detailed understanding of it. But giving you a very simple example to understand this. For example, when we build a house, there are different bricks which is being used. Let's go by the Indian model of building a construction in a house, not the Western one. Each brick is there, and when each brick is put together, there need to be something which puts them together, right? So here the karmic body is this layer which ties up all the karma coming, puts it into shape or gives a structure to it. So basically this and this, you see a difference and a similarity in this? I don't want to confuse you, but still I'm trying to create a problem which is there in, to understand it, that when we talk about bodies, karmic bodies, actually that body which whenever we are doing any action, there is karma coming up. Who puts this karma into structure, form, sticks it to the soul? The structurization of the karma, tying up with the soul, is done by the karmic body, right? So basically the karmic body deals with all the karmas. So sometimes if when you hear a statement that all the karma is karmic body, it's just a different understanding of it because it deals with all the karmas. But literally the role of karmic body is putting everything together. Yes? So you see that each body has a very significant role to play, and the three which we have is Audaric, Karmic and Tejas. Yes? Okay, so in my next session, I'll try to simplify more, but it's going to be about how these three bodies, which is a gift with us for today, interacts to give us different kinds of emotions, how we escalate to a higher level, what is Lesha, what is aura, and things around where Acharya goes further detail into it.
So could you just briefly explain the analogy taken Urja, and so in this when this stanza?
Urja, Ushma and Dhoop. So Urja is energy, Ushma is the heat in it, right? So for example, there is sun energy or fire energy, there is heat in it. So that is Ushma. And Dhoop means the sunlight, which is like apan kehte hain dhoop hai, like the sunlight. The sun, the heat in the sun, and the light which we get here basically. It's something like that. So the Tejas body is actually the fire body, the bioelectric body. The source of all the bodies is karma in a way. And what we see at the gross level is the Audaric body. The gross body is there, which we are sitting here. But the driving force behind it is the karmic body and the Tejas body. These two gives us life, these two gives us sustenance. Every new karma which comes in, like for example, every new member who enters into the room, there are someone who's making sitting arrangements for them, right? So did the person who made sitting arrangements for everyone is involved with everyone, right? But is not everyone, right? Similarly, karmic body is involved in structuring the karma, though it need not itself be the whole karma. But since it puts together the whole building, it gets a different recognition in a way. Because without this, who would put the bricks together? No one. That is the reason when we say that karma always sticks to karma. Karma is material energy. When we say when I'm a soul, why should I get all the polluted energy of karma? I don't want it. So who is pulling in karma? Is it the soul or the matter?
The soul doesn't have any reaction or action.
Because then it comes listing of bhav karma and dravya karma. So it is the soul, the bhav karma, which is pulling it.
The soul has bhav karma, which means the soul has the emotions, the thinking, the action in it, which pulls in the karmic energy. But why will the karmic energy touch to the soul? Because if the soul is amurt, which means it is formless, how can a form being interact with the formless? How can a tangible being interact with the non-tangible? how can a entity which has color, taste, smell and everything interact with something which is colorless, tasteless, smellless, nothing except knowledge, for example. So why this interaction, how is it possible? Because the soul already has this karmic body which kind of pulls in, sticks the whole karma together. So the karma actually binds with the karma. Only impure soul receives impure energy. Siddha soul, the liberated soul, do they get any karmic energy? Where there are liberated souls sitting, right? There is karma there. There is. The karmic particles is similarly lying everywhere in cosmos, whether it is here or there. But nothing is happening to them, nothing is impacting them, whether it is cold weather, whether it is warm weather, whether it is anything around, nothing influences them. Whereas we are influenced with everything and we are constantly pulling in energy. What's the difference? The complete pure state has no scope of binding, inviting more karmas. Because of the already impure state, we are pulling in more karmas. And as we grow higher in spirituality, the mechanism actually switches. We say that every good thing you do, you get punya, right? But as you grow higher and higher, the punya is less, the discarding of the karma is more. For now, a person does anything, the punya could be like, 1 ton of punya, and how much did the person lose the negative energy? Because everything you're doing, you're losing the negative energy, negative karmas. Every time you do good thing, 2 things are happening. One is the old kachra, old karma is releasing out, and you're bringing in punya, which is new good karma. Now, if you're constantly taking good karma, when will it end? Because ultimately you have to get rid of the good karma as well. So the process, as we grow in higher spirituality, the good karma, the taking in of good karma will also slow down. And the shedding of karma would get intensified more and more. So in the last moment of the, before the liberation, there is a lot of shedding of karma and no taking of good karma. That is the reason why stillness is needed. Because without stillness, every moment there is, every time there is an action, you pull in the good karma. The moment you go to complete stillness, there is nothing received, it's only release. And that is the final stage, where there is just one-way traffic, there is not to both ways. But until that, even in the 13th Gunasthan, even for an enlightened soul, even for a Tirthankar, when he is giving Upadesh, right? Thousands of people are getting into spirituality, they're taking Diksha there. So shouldn't he be taking lot of good karma? If he takes too much of good karma, then he'll have to be born again, right? When will he get rid of that good karma then? So there, in that stage, though the highest good is done by the Tirthankar, right? In a way, the biggest good is by the Tirthankar. The good karma which comes is not to that degree. It comes, it goes. It doesn't stay with the soul. It comes, it touches the soul, it gets discarded.
Why? How? Because of the state of mind.
It is because there are 2 kinds of bondages. That is, there is one bondage where there is attachment and aversion involved in it. There is another bondage where there is neither attachment nor aversion involved in it. So when you do an act, you do it with intense emotion. The wall is there, for example. If the wall is wet or the wall has oil on it, and if you throw some sand on it, the sand will stick to the wall if it is wet or it has oil. If it is dry wall, it will touch the wall, but it will not stay with the wall, right? Similarly, the Tirthankars or the Kevali, they're completely detached. They don't have attachment or aversion. So the glue is attachment aversion. The moment you drop the glue, the karma might come because it has a tendency to come, you're in the mode of action, but it will not stick to the wall. It will come, touch, drop. So it is 2 seconds, 2 nanoseconds duration of the karmic bondage.
So it's karmic-less soul and it just bounces, water, wood, karma cultures bounces, that's it.
Yes. It doesn't really have any impact on
It
the soul.
doesn't stick.
That's the reason we say anything you do, the moment you do it with detachment, whether you're cooking, taking care of the house, cleaning, you have to do all sorts of things, business, get money, increase your bank balance. The moment you do with detachment, it's like a dry wall. The karma might come, but not stick to you, with you intensely. It will drop eventually very soon. Again, we are not completely detached like the Tirthankars and the Keval Jnani is. But the degree to which you can increase this detachment, any action could be simple as very close to non-action. Why? Because it is the karma might come and go away. It's not easy to practice this detachment. But the moment, I mean, it's not just for you, it's for me as well. We constantly think that this week, let me try to be detached. Detached from what I do, what I have to take care of, my responsibilities. I have to do everything. But without the ego, without the thought of mindness, without the obsession of I did it. Just do it because you have to do it. And let go the moment you've done it.
Does it not make us look like Pathar Dil?
For that we'll talk in the next session because the time is up. It might sound that, but we'll discuss more about it. That how detachment, the Pathar Dil would actually, a person with detachment, when he does it, the energy which he carries of detachment is so high that it's positive. It's not like a person when he is Pathar Dil, like for example, a person is going to war, right? He has to have a real heavy heart to kill so many people. But if a person is detached and doing it, like for example, I mean, though the method of the message is different, like in Krishna says Arjuna, don't think that you are the doer. Don't involve yourself in thinking that I'm the killer and someone is dying and everything. Detach from everything. Go into the mode of non-doer. So there, the method, though the message is put it in a different this thing, but the idea that I'm non-doer, actually, here we are not denying to the fact that I am doing. You are doing, but that ego of doing it, or like for example, if it's something negative, then you say, oh, because Bhagwan told me, so I'm becoming a mediator of this war. It's not denying that doership here in Jainism. It only means don't carry the 4 vices, Krodh, Man, Maya, Lobh, with your action. Which doesn't mean you're forbidden for your act or you're not rewarded for your act. It only means every act brings in less karma by doing in a detached mode. Making
So the
sense?
power is reduced. You still have the act.
Yes, the power is reduced, and the problem is with the power, right? How intensely the karma impacts you is the biggest problem. If it's a mild fever, it is bearable. You don't want to go to the doctor. You want to take care of yourself home. But if it's intense, then you need a doctor for that. So here, if the power is reduced, you can bear it simply. It doesn't make you, it doesn't shake you off. If it's too much, then you start questioning why it happened to me. So it's just trying to go through the karmic force in a milder mode. Okay? So let's have this week of detachment. Try basically. Right? Om.